Resident Evil 8. Talk about a glorious win for Capcom. Not only has the game received positive feedback from fans of the series, but it's also sold many copies. If you keep this in mind and think about the multiple DLCs Resident Evil 7 had, it's not too far of a reach to suggest Resident Evil 8 will have some kind of future downloadable content of some kind. The question is, what the heck would it be? This isn't a Resident Evil 7 situation where Zoe's fate was left ambiguous and there was still one last Baker to catch. All of the House Lords are killed, every side character we met besides the Duke and Chris's squad was immediately met with a vicious death, and Ethan's story has come to a complete close following his heroic sacrifice. So, what is there? Well, sit back because I'm going to give out some ideas for some possible DLC we could be getting down the road if we were to get any at all. Now this first one might sound obvious, and it's definitely the most likely candidate out of all these options, but a Chris Redfield DLC sounds like a no-brainer. Not only would it be a nice nod to 7 since it too had a Chris DLC, but when you take everything into account, it makes perfect sense. If you revisit the church near Louise's house, you can see that Chris and his squad found their way into the village and set up a base in the church. And him and his squad actually run into Ethan during the main story before they're all attacked by Moreau. So what if we get a DLC where we're playing as Chris during the events of the main game? You already play as him during the climax, so Capcom has already incorporated him into the gameplay of RE8, and if he's just making his way through areas Ethan has already been in, then they can completely save on assets and not have to worry about creating any new environments. On the story side of things, the DLC could all be Chris's perspective on the situation. We can follow him as he uncovers all of the information he kept to himself for the majority of the main game. This could even lead to us figuring out information we could have never uncovered as Ethan to better build upon the already established lore the main story set up. Now the second possibility of a Chris DLC could be following the cutscene at the end of the game where it's revealed the BSAA has gone fully corrupt and are now sending bioweapons into the field. However, I'm going to be real with you guys, I don't think we'll be seeing how all that unfolds until maybe 2026 or 2027. The year where we'll most likely be getting RE9. Capcom confirmed that Resident Evil 7, 8, and 9 are all a trilogy, but personally, I don't see how 9 could follow up most of 8. Ethan gave his life to end the threat of the Megamycete, and his story has come to a close. Unless we have a massive time jump and we follow Rose in the 9th game, the only way 9 can connect to 8 is if we see the conclusion of this subplot. In fact, I think that's the entire reason it was even mentioned at the end of 8, so it can directly transition to 9 once that comes out in the future. But hey, I could be wrong. But that's just a hunch of mine. Now another idea I had for RE8 DLC is a little bit more of a reach, but I still believe it to be a possibility. A DLC where we play as Elena from the main game. I know that sounds totally ridiculous, but hear me out. What you are seeing on screen is footage of Elena, Leonardo, and other villagers which you never saw make it into the main game. If you read a note in the village, you find out Leonardo went to go investigate a scream that came from Eugene's house, which is where he most likely received a scratch that would ultimately seal his fate. I think there is more than likely going to be a DLC where you're watching through Elena or some other villager's perspective as the village descends to chaos and is overtaken by Lycans. This could explain all of the footage in the trailers we saw of some of these characters that never made it into the main game, and it would make their gruesome fate all the more tragic. Out of any DLC, this would likely be the one I'd most prefer because I feel like it would be most exciting. While we saw that Elena was capable of using a gun, she didn't seem all that experienced or hardened in combat, so playing as her would most likely be pretty intense since you'd have to mainly rely on stealth or puzzle solving. And like I said with the possible Chris DLC, Capcom can completely save on assets since they already have a fully rendered village they can throw us into. The last possible idea I had was, believe it or not, a Ada Wong DLC. I saved the biggest reach for last, but hear me out. Ada Wong was supposed to appear in the main game. There's even complete concept art of what she would have looked like. But Capcom cut her appearance out of the story entirely. And I actually get that. This is the conclusion of Ethan Winter's story, and Chris already does a good job at providing any necessary fan service and helps make the story feel even more connected to the overall Resident Evil lore. Having Ada make an appearance would kinda be a bit unnecessary and would make the story feel a little too bloated. But if she really was going to appear in the main game, Capcom would have already thought of a scenario in which she would be connected to the story, right? Granted, Ada making an appearance was an early concept, so whatever they had planned probably wouldn't coincide with the final product. but there's a chance it could, and think about how much inspiration this game takes from RE4. Later ports of that game included an entire Ada Wong segment, so they could likely be doing the same thing here. And for such a fan-favorite character, the last time we canonically saw her was in 2013 during the events of Resident Evil 6. Seeing what she's up to all of these years later would be pretty assuring for hardcore fans. And with that, those are all of my ideas for Resident Evil 8 Village DLCs. I personally think all of these are pretty probable, but what about you guys? Do any of you have any ideas for RE8 DLCs? Better yet, what would you like to see as a DLC? Let me know in the comments below.